Hari Om friends, good morning and welcome to the first part of the series on famines by the British in India. So this series is only going to be a very high level overview of the mortality or the deaths caused by famines due to the British in India over a course of roughly around 150 200 years, starting from the Bengal famine of the 1770s and ending with again the Bengal famine of 1943-44. And I will be making separate videos on each of these famines because these are quite detailed subjects which need to be tackled on their own. But this is going to be a very high level overview, and this is based on an article I wrote a long time back on my blog. And this article was around 2010, based on famines in India, and this was the first article on the web, I believe, which introduced the total death toll of around 90 million Indians killed. And I think there was a study later on, much recently, which kind of uh, corroborates or validates that figure as well. Okay, so let's go on. And as usual, we will first pay our respects to Goddess Saraswati. Saraswati Namastubhyam Varade Kamarupini Vidyarambham Karishyami Siddhir Bhavatu Me Sada. And I would like to dedicate this and all future videos in memory of my dear eye, Professor Sunanda Y. Shastri. Okay, so the inspiration for my article and pretty much a lot of the source material for the blog article and this video is taken from a superb book called Late Victorian Holocausts. This was written by American historian not Mark, it's Mike Davis, who I think passed away quite recently, a few years back. So absolutely fantastic book, and I found this book when I was in the UK around 2009 in the local city library, and I used to read this on my commute on the train. And I used to make notes, not in the book, but I had a notebook, and that kind of inspired me to get started with the blog. And that was really the starting point. So fantastic book. And Mike Davis, again, I mentioned Professor Utsa Patnaik, and when I say that Marxists do some brilliant analytical work, and when they are intellectually honest, it's kind of difficult to replicate the level of their work. So Mike Davis was a Marxist as well, but this book is absolutely fantastic. And if you read some of the reviews on Amazon, there are a lot of angry reviews by the British, because they don't like their self-image of being the best people in the world being questioned. So fantastic book, please do read it. And a lot of material again, this presentation is sourced from this book. Okay, so let's start with defining a famine. So what is famine? A classic definition, and I think I got these from one of the online dictionaries. So famine is a widespread scarcity of food that may apply to any faunal species. So any animal living species basically. This phenomenon is usually accompanied and preceded by regional malnutrition, starvation, epidemic, and increased mortality. Okay, so famine doesn't need to be accompanied by hundreds of thousands or millions of people dying. So that is just one of the possible consequences of a famine. But malnutrition, starvation, yes. Epidemics, absolutely, because your immune system is quite weakened because of lack of food. And this is what used to happen in India. So there used to be one massive death toll in a famine, millions dead. And after that, what was not counted was the death toll due to epidemics such as cholera and different diseases, because the survivors, their immune system was completely destroyed by absolute starvation. They were living skeletons. And a famine is defined in different Indian languages. So akal in Hindi, dushkal in Gujarati, dushkal in Marathi, and I think it's karuvu in Telugu. So again, pronunciation might be wrong. So what is the cause of a famine? So typically I'm just talking about the last 150 years roughly. So there is a weather phenomena or a natural phenomena called El Nino Southern Oscillation, which is known as ENSO, ENSO. So I used to call this El Nino for a long time, and I recently learned the Spanish pronunciation is actually El Nino. So what El Nino basically does is it causes a lot of rainfall on the coast of South America, and it causes monsoon failure in India. So this is a very simplistic view. You can go online and read. There are very detailed explanations and videos on this. It's quite a famous phenomenon. So for our purposes, so El Nino causes monsoon failure. So monsoon failure then leads to what? So monsoon failure leads to drought, because India even today is a predominantly agricultural country, and this causes failure of the crops. So no water, so scarcity, so droughts, and the droughts cause the crops to fail because there is no water. So a logical chain of events. And the next logical thing is famine, because once crops fail, you don't have enough food to survive. Forget about selling food on the food grains or food on the market. It's a struggle for survival because there's not enough food for yourself. So it's famine. And this now is questionable. So is the next logical thing that the millions are dead? Okay, nope. So crops failing does not need to lead to famine. Does not need to lead to famine. So crops failing does not mean that everybody should suddenly start starving, and I'll explain to you why. So these three steps, so ENSO, causing monsoon failure, causing droughts, causing crops to fail, is a logical progression of steps. But famine and millions dead is not a logical progression. Okay, these last two steps do not need to happen. Okay. So here are some of the steps by which these last two devastating consequences can be mitigated or removed altogether. First thing is, as a country, you should ban the export of food grains. So this is what India has done after 1947, after the transfer of power, where we had famine conditions on 2 or 3 different occasions, and on each occasion the food export was completely banned. Second thing is, you need to use all your transportation, so whether it is railways or automobiles or whatever you have got, to get food supplies to the famine affected parts, because famine doesn't affect the entire country in one go. It might affect one state, 2 states, 3 states, or sometimes it's quite localized. It might even affect just a few districts in a state. Second thing is, if you have got taxes, especially agriculture taxes, you just suspend them for the time being. You just say, I won't collect taxes for the next couple of years till the people recover from the famine effect. Most important, keep a reserve stock. And India has kind of implemented this policy in a big way. So you've got something called the Food Corporation of India, which has got massive food stocks, and that is another kind of scandal as well, because a lot of food stocks are deliberately allowed to spoil so they can be sold to these I think liquor factory owners, because they use grains for fermentation and liquor, etc. But that's a different story. And important thing, famines always give advance warning. Remember the natural progression of steps. So first you have got the monsoon, you have got the El Nino Southern Oscillation ENSO effect causing monsoon failure. So as soon as monsoon fails, that's the first danger signal. Okay, we need to get ready for a possible famine. Okay, and none of this was done during the British rule, because their main aim was to extract as much wealth from India as possible. Okay, and this naturally led to the photograph you see is from the Gujarat famine. I think it's of 1899 nearabouts, and you can see millions of people dead. So this was a very common sight. You can go online and have a look at the images. So pretty terrible thing. But in independent India, none of this has happened. So we don't have this millions dying, and thankfully we don't get to see, or at least during my stay in India, never saw this happening. And I witnessed one of the most severe droughts. So the 1987 Gujarat drought was one of the most severe droughts, and I was in Ahmedabad at that point of time. And I remember a lot of displaced people from Saurashtra, which was hardest hit, coming into Ahmedabad. A lot of people were bringing their, cows. A lot of camel herders came too, because we used to kind of live on the outskirts of Ahmedabad. And I also seen, because we went to Saurashtra for a trip, and I remember seeing a lot of dead animal carcasses all around, because the drought The drought and the famine conditions were quite severe, but people didn't die. So there was malnutrition, but people didn't die. So effects can be mitigated. And again, coming back to the point, so what's the whole point of this? So I call the period from the 1760s to 1947. Here I've written 1943, but you can say 1947 as the Indian Dark Ages or the Hindu Dark Ages as well. And these Dark Ages were induced by the British. So more than 85 million Indians died in man-made famines. It's a massive toll. Now Indians are a very desensitized lot, so for us this doesn't really count. So if a few people die, say in Israel or somewhere else, we'll feel more than if our own people are getting killed in places like Manipur. So we are that we can't help it. And this happened under the so-called British Raj. And I coined a term for this called the Christian British occupation, or the CBO of Bharat or India, because see, Britain till even 60s was a very Christian nation. And in the next part of the series I will address how some of this influenced their view of especially Hindus as pagans or heathens. So once you class people as pagans or heathens, automatically you kind of go down to the animal level, you are no longer human. And in independent India, as I have mentioned, or Swatantra Bharat, no comparable famine deaths, not even in thousands, forget about the lakhs and millions. Okay, so that's all for this time. In the next part of the series, I'll touch on the slumdog syndrome. So friends, if you have liked this video, please do remember to like, share and subscribe. And I will see you next time. Thank you.